Hello, everyone. Welcome to our AKS community call, where today we'll be talking about the AKS feature announcements from our recent KubeCon and Ignite events. We're definitely excited to have all of you here. So today's session will be delivered by George Palmer. George is our principal PM lead for AKS, and he's driving it to be one of Azure's fastest growing service. He has held various roles in Azure since 2012 and has successfully founded 2 startups as well. George has a passion for helping organizations and individuals grow and succeed leveraging the cloud and Kubernetes. Now, a few quick housekeeping items before we get started. Right, so this call is going to be recorded, and we will be later uploading it to the AKS YouTube channel as well for those people who could not join us live today. Starting January of the new year, 2025, we will be starting a monthly series for community calls discussing our product roadmap. So please do definitely help us spread the word, join those calls every month, and there will be more information coming up about this calls on our community calls page. All of the participants will be muted throughout this call to ensure a smooth and uninterrupted session. There is an option for you to ask questions during the webinar. If you're logged in from the iOS app, you may not be able to see the Q&A option, so we definitely recommend you switch to a web browser if you wish to ask questions. All the questions will be moderated and will be responded to at the end of the discussion. If you prefer, you can also ask the questions anonymously. Lastly, we would love to hear from you on the content that you would see from the AKS product team going forward. So there is a QR code on this presentation right here, which you can use to provide your feedback. And for the recent KubeCon North America as well as KubeCon India event that is ongoing, we had Azure pre-day events. The recording for these events can be found on our YouTube channel as well. You can access these using the QR codes here. The India event is, of course, ongoing as we speak, so those recordings will be available shortly, but the North America recordings are already there on the YouTube. You can use the QR code here. And thank you for joining us today. We'll get started with the latest AKS feature announcements. Over to you, George. Thank you.
Thanks, Ankit. A quick note for everyone. So the goal here with this session today is to really just walk through the announcements that we had. So as Ankit was saying, we have a little bit of more of a story with the actual thinking behind them, as well as best practices and more in our community. And you can access some of the most recent ones on the links and QR codes there. For the India one, the recordings will be available next week. And so for here, this will be fairly fast-paced. We do have a lot of announcements that we want to get through. We might not be able to get through all of them. If we do get through all of them, I'll try to also squeeze in a couple of demos if we have time. And as I was saying, do throw in the questions. We probably will have some time going through them in chat and also after the fact. And I want to make sure we get all this content to you. We're also happy to share the content that we're providing here to you afterwards, so feel free to reach out for that as well. Just a little bit of a kind of framing to a lot of what we've been doing and where a lot of these announcements kind of fall into. Our strategy for the current period, as well as let's say the next 6 months roughly, is kind of guardrailed in 2 key pieces that have been 2 guardrails from a long time already. One is ensuring that AKS is focused on you and is enabling you and your business and your goals and your teams to achieve more. And that is embedded into the Azure ecosystem on one end, taking the best of everything that Microsoft and the Microsoft ecosystem has to give, from development, from operations, from security, but also is rooted in everything that we do is open source rooted, so that everything that we build, everything that we use has an open source root for a number of reasons, both so that you can use it in anywhere, in any Kubernetes cluster, be it on-prem, be it in kind of multiple environments, heterogeneous environments, hybrid, etc. As well as for the fact that we want to make sure that we are both giving back to the community, that we are delivering on the premise of Kubernetes, which is that premise of portability and that premise of pluggability and extensibility. We want to make sure that AKS continues and extends on that promise and not actually makes kind of a little bit of a flavor of it of any sort. And we just try to basically tool around it, plug additionally and more features towards it and a lot more. And so this is kind of some of the guardrails that we have. Now, in terms of actual focus areas that we've been looking at, and a lot of the announcements will be either in these focus areas or under them, in some way, shape, or form. Some of them will be a bit outside, but you'll see the majority of them be in a lot of these focus areas. We have essentially the flexibility and elastic capacity. We want to make sure that a lot of you can actually benefit from that elasticity from the cloud. A lot of that can sometimes be somewhat of a challenge where someone might come into the cloud like, all right, I have infinite capacity and I'm just going to go and go wild and have everything that I want all the time, always. And the truth is you have that kind of infinite capacity, but not maybe in the heterogeneous way that otherwise you might think. And so you might be, for example, locked into a specific SKU or locked into a specific combination of SKUs and regions, locked into a specific combination of SKU regions, specific hardware like Ultra SSDs or trusted launch or all kinds of different combinations that might actually make that not as flexible or not as elastic. And so as from an AKS perspective, we see this as a challenge for our users and an opportunity for us to actually help out. And we want to make sure that we kind of give back into the bit of that promise of flexibility and elasticity by hiding out a bit of that complexity and offering things that make it much easier for you to just consume resources without having to maybe know a lot about SKUs or all these combinations or all these different matrix of compatibility and requirements. The other side is focusing on the developer productivity and really enabling this new AI generation and AI revolution that we're seeing right now from both kind of the data scientist side, but also from the developer side. And this comes from how AI is helping developers and also how we are helping developers leverage AI to build their apps or to infuse AI into their apps to help their users in turn. The other, under that, we have kind of the a key focus for us that continues to be one, which is making sure it's a never-ending mission to make sure that the performance and scale, we continue to push those boundaries, as a lot of you, both in the call as well as not on the call, in the user space outside of Microsoft as well as in the user space inside of Microsoft, continue to push the service to kind of new boundaries and new heights with very, very large users and use cases on the millions of users, billions of users in some cases, and more. Pushing that to new heights and new grounds is always a never-ending task for us, and we want to make sure that the performance is always the best, that the scalability and scale capabilities are the best, and offer you all the right settings and functionality that you might need, and that the targets that we go for meet you where you are. So we're always open to kind of have discussions if there's something that you're trying to push forward that we don't have, or if there's something that you're trying to achieve that you might not be able. This is something that we're always very, very keen to partner up, but also to continue to deliver more mainstream way for everyone to have in access. As an example, our 5K nodes is kind of some of that key way where we had folks using 5Ks even before that was widely open. Then we kind of opened that up per request, and then we opened that up for everybody. And now we have a lot of users just using that out there. But even before that, we got to a lot of large numbers even before we opened it up to mainstream. On the left-hand side, it's a bit of a shift on how we've been looking at the service and looking at the platform from, I would say, the last few years, where we approach it very much from a service reliability and resiliency perspective, to a different lens. Now that we feel very confident about the space where the service is today, we see the large majority of issues that might occur that lead to downtime of your users be a bit of a mix between maybe architecture or maybe something that could be better, more resilient in the overall solution. Sometimes that's things on our side that we can improve. Sometimes that's things on your side. But no matter where the the gap might be or where that could be, we want to actually go into that space and do more. So be more proactive for that workload resiliency and focus more on the workload, not necessarily in the quality of service of maybe the operation X, but maybe the outcome that you might be seeking or your users might be seeking. So that entails things such as, sure, maybe our upgrade is 99.999 successful from a operational perspective, but does that make it equivalent to the success rate of the operation? Meaning that does it succeed all the times, or does it need to be canceled a lot of the times because either lack of PDBs or incorrect pod description budgets or breaking changes or things like that? And that's been a lot of the features that we've been shipping in that space to exactly help with that. Under that, making sure that all the over 140 controls we have for security are effortless. We've been shipping a lot of functionality in that space over the many years that AKS has been out to ensure that we have that comprehensive and holistic security story. But one of the key things that brought in is quite a lot of knobs, and some of them a bit more complex to understand, where you might need to really understand either that space or technology and want to make that both more default, more built-in, more easy to use, and have note not a lot of the different types of sometimes trade-offs that you have when you start to adopt or to harden your cluster or adopt security solutions. So make it effortless, make it built-in, and not have specific trade-offs across the board. And then on the right-hand side, bottom right, cost. So we've been doing a lot on that kind of cost scalability for both new apps and migration of apps, and we'll talk a bit about that as well. We've done a lot in order for you to achieve that ability to be very cost optimized and cost efficient. However, what we've heard from a lot of you has been that that is not immediate, and that is sometimes something that is a more of an after the fact type of thought, or something that is more of a situation where you might first find that, the first bill is actually not what I expected, and then you go and find out that, oh, actually I'm very unoptimized, and then you go and optimize, and then now that gets better. But that's not what we want it to be. We want it to be very efficient from the start, and not have to kind of go back into it and figure out that, oh, why am I doing this way, and why am I doing that way? So not just via default, but also just the service nudging you the right direction automatically, as the title leads the way. So without further ado, let's get started with developer productivity and AI. And so in this case, the goal here is how we have AI helping you with developer productivity. And one of the key things that we've done, we've revved the AKS extension for VS Code quite a few times. That has a number of new features. We're going to talk about a few of them, but from there's of course all kinds of integration with Draft, with GitHub Copilot, and now you even have a GitHub Copilot for Azure integrated there, which is something that is now in public preview, and it supports the AKS plugins themselves. So with the AKS GitHub Copilot for Azure plugin, the extension, you basically can perform all kinds of AKS tasks within essentially GitHub Copilot from the chat view that you have, for example, in VS Code. So you can go in and say, hey, please help me create an AKS cluster with auto-scaling turned on, and it will essentially give you, and you can even say, give me that in a CLI fashion. It will give you a CLI script. It can tell me, give me the ARM template for an AKS cluster to do that, and it can help you deploy a manifest. Say, hey, what's the example of a manifest deploy Nginx, or what's a kubectl command to view the logs in a running pod, and it will help you through it. It also has a ton of context on AKS and a ton of context on Kubernetes as well, loaded into this. And then this is, of course, inserted into the broader Azure ecosystem, so you can use this GitHub Copilot for Azure to add additional things. Like you can get help with some troubleshooting pieces, you can get help with additional services that you might be using with AKS, and more. So this is, as I was saying, inserted into that broader kind of Microsoft Copilot for Azure. For some of you that have been with us for a while, you might have noticed that we actually launch a little bit of an AKS Copilot before this, so you'll find a lot of scenarios already very focused on AKS from the start because of that. And then that kind of expanded to all of Azure and became the Microsoft Copilot for Azure that we're really, really happy and excited with. And with it, we continue to ship a lot of new handlers and a lot of new capabilities all the time. We right now have it not only in Portal, where you have it in different ways, where you can embed it in your actions, you can have it as a chat assistant. You can also now not have it not only in VS Code and GitHub, but also have it in the CLI. So you have CLI availability for this as well. So if you're more of a CLI person, you can go on and have Copilot as well natively in the CLI, leveraging the CLI plugins as well. So carrying on to now the build of intelligent apps. So we've talked a bit about how AI can help your productivity. Now about build intelligent apps on AKS and what kind of things do we have there. So as I mentioned, one of the things that we have in that space is Draft that is integrated into the VS Code extension, and that helps you both bootstrap applications that might not be containerized, bootstrap net new applications, generate manifests. Maybe you're just trying to get a quick way to get manifests from the ground because no one likes to do those from scratch, or you're just not that familiar with Kubernetes manifests or Helm charts or customize and you just want some help in there. And so Draft can do that for you. The Portal version of that, we call them automated deployments. So that's the UI version of this open source Draft project. And it's been GA very recently, and it had multiple UI improvements, including having multiple GitHub actions available for a single repository that allows you to have all kinds of different microservice architectures in a single repository versus, for example, having different repositories per microservice. It allows you to have all kinds of different, so what we call there the mono repo structure kind of support. We have a lot of improved templating engine. So one of the key feedbacks that we've been getting from a lot of you is the ability to get your own customizations and your own templates as part of the flows that Draft does for those templates. And so that's something that we'll be doing so that Draft generates templates with all the best practices, but there might be specific things that you want to add there. Maybe as a key example, a label with a cost center for some cross-charging inside of your organization. So Draft will support that type of templating as well, while still kind of enforcing a lot of those best practices that can be deployed in clusters, such as the AKS automatic clusters, where those best practices are enforced. So in an automatic cluster, you won't even be able to deploy things that don't follow best practices. So that's where Draft really comes in handy, because if your team is not privy to best practices, like a lot of teams might not be, you need something that actually bootstraps and generates all those files and all those manifests for you and still keeps you very productive and makes things still very simple without maybe requiring you to be an expert of Kubernetes and all the best practices around and know all about topology and know all about security contexts and more. One of the key things that AKS Automatic are more kind of managed SKU and more guardrailed SKU of AKS that delivers all the management for you and, as I said, enforces all the best practices, is that now the system pools are dynamically managed. So that means everything's kind of dynamically scaled and created for you, and you don't need to worry about that. Again, Automatic's promise around the GA timeframe is going to be to completely allow you to focus only on the application, and that's really what we're walking towards. And we really, really are happy with the feedback and all the tests that we're having from a lot of you. And please keep it coming. We really want to make sure that Automatic is hitting that right sweet spot. And you can always, of course, traverse between Automatic and Standard to get kind of that full-fledged AKS, or just turn Automatic to have a more padded experience, or in many ways an easier, more managed experience. Now, continuing on that sense of how we're empowering to build to deploy intelligent applications, comes KAITO. And so KAITO, for those of you that might not know, is our Kubernetes AI toolchain operator. It allows you to run models and inferencing models locally in Kubernetes, which is a very good platform if you're trying to run a model outside of a SaaS, like an OpenAI service or all the AI services that Azure offers, kind of hosted in as a SaaS. That's the easiest option that you're going to get. Like you're just going to go have an app and then consume those, maybe have some API management. That's very, very simple. But for numerous reasons, from privacy to regulatory reasons to residency reasons, you might want to have those things locally. But going kind of back, and I call it back as I already see that as a little bit backwards, into having a bunch of files for those models in a VM or all these different things is not going to be matching the rest of your more cloud native environment. And Kubernetes is a great platform to do these kind of things, to both scale those models, have the inferencing running on them. Containers are a great way to do things like distributing those models across, making them traverse environments, and much, much more. The issue is that there wasn't a lot of tooling that simplify that and made that easily and more democratized. So you kind of had to know a little bit about, again, AI. You might need to know a bit about models and maybe a bit about Kubernetes in order to make use of it. So with KAITO, we basically created this workspace concept that allowed you to very simply just select the model from an open source catalog, select the GPU, or it didn't allow that for us as we were integrating with provisioners, and then that just trains that for you. And we even provide an endpoint that is OpenAI kind of compliant, and then you can just go ahead and use that in your API or your app or whatever directly. So one of the key things about KAITO is that it's fully open source. And we're really, really happy to announce, now matching KubeCon India, that is now entering its last day, that KAITO has been accepted as a cloud native Computing Foundation sandbox project. So it's now been donated to the CNCF, and it's now a sandbox project in there. And we really believe in the power of having all the things that we build donated and openly governed, not just open source, but also openly governed, to make sure that they have their own future driven, not by necessarily us, by the community and by all of you, and it kind of to guarantee as well a bit more of its future and all the dependency that you might have with them, both in AKS and anywhere that you use them. And with that donation, it's not just the only announcement. We actually have, as part of the announcement, a couple of cool additional features to it. One of them is the integration with Visual Studio Code and our extensions. So you can actually now browse the KAITO models directly from VS Code. So if you're familiar with our extension, you can just go into a cluster and then right-click and install KAITO. And then from there, you can even go and see what models you can deploy to them, select the model, and it will be deployed to your cluster very, very easily, and it will run from there. You're going to be soon able to fine-tune that model also from VS Code, and we're working on UIs and integrations from it as well in other platforms like the portal and more. The other announcement that we have that we are fairly excited with is essentially integration with VLLMs, and that will greatly improve the performance for essentially inference workloads. So when it comes to kind of the responsiveness and scalability of AI features, say like a recommendation engine or chatbots or something like that, you want to make sure that you're keeping up with the traffic of your application, and VLM just handles the influx of those incoming requests a lot better. It batches them and optimizes the performance of your model, and has like a 15 times in many cases increase in throughput. And with the latest release of KAITO, the 0.4.0, we actually are making VLM as a default. So you don't have to do anything for it. It just comes out of the box for you, and it just delivers a faster inferencing with all our supported models. With it, you can use OpenAI endpoints like a chat or embeddings, and do a lot more to customize your model style with KAITO. Next, we also have just a quick showing of how you could easily use that. So you can still use things like transformer, and you do that just basically by tweaking the annotation on the workspace. So as I mentioned, if you don't set this up by default, it will use VLLM. But if you prefer to use transformers, which has a lot of valid reasons for using that as well, you can just manually decide which one you prefer in that case. And as I mentioned, from there, you can very easily have, in this case, using 3.5, a OpenAI compliant endpoint that you can use, so that everything that you use, for example, from that POC that you did, maybe directly with a SaaS like OpenAI service, and now maybe you have to bring that into a local environment or a Kubernetes, a managed hosted, self-hosted environment, you can still essentially do it with little to no changes to your application while basically running inferencing and then tuning on the model right there. In addition to this, a lot of the necessities that you might have as you leveraging, as you might want to leverage AI is, of course, on the GPU infrastructure. And the GPU infrastructure is very heterogeneous across the board. You might have different SKUs, you might have different hardware, and those are serving different necessities. You might want to use them for more visualization support. You might want to use them more for data-intensive applications, batch processing, risk analysis, all kinds of things. And based on that, you might need to have different drivers for that. So there's in this case, NVIDIA-based drivers that are more, in the case of for Grid, more for visualization, or in the case of CUDA, more for these computational tasks. And they're kind of, it's a bit of an either or. And we're now allowing you to select them per node pool, so you can even have different types of node pools with different types of drivers running different types of workloads in the same cluster. And you can very easily select them, and we'll install them for you. And of course, these are maintained by us, and you can, if you have any issue or any problem, you can always come to us. But you can very easily select and alternate between them in the different node pools. Now moving on and shifting gears a bit into the more workload resiliency areas. And this has been an area of a lot of development and a lot of small improvements from AKS that you might not notice, at least not if you compare maybe a bit of a more distant time frame for you, or maybe if you just started, or if you have one cluster and it's been that same cluster for quite a while, there's been a lot of development to improve and to get those iterative improvements across this time, and also not just from us, but from a lot of our partner teams and underlying infrastructure teams. That has led to a lot of improvements from, for example, throttling, which has been historically an interesting challenge where the Kubernetes API and controllers have this kind of reconciliatory nature, which is API intensive, so that they're always making calls and checking that everything is according to the desired state, and if not, they're making changes to ensure that the infrastructure is according to the desired state. And a lot of the way that the Azure APIs worked before was not expecting that type of interaction and that type of pattern. So we had to work both within Kubernetes, within the AKS service, and then but also on the platform side, on the Azure infrastructure side, to ensure that this actually there's a good middle ground between this becoming more of a pattern for Azure and ensuring that we all are using all the Azure best practices within Kubernetes and within the service. And that had led us to a lot more improvements, from 3x in terms of scale, and increase the number of clusters you can have per subscription to be much, much higher. And we expect to have shortly even a 10x to continues to improve on the scalability of the API server. Again, the API server is kind of, you see in that image, colorful image. Scalability in Kubernetes is a very multidimensional type of, let's call it problem or challenge or space, because it's never about, oh, how many pods can you have? Well, it depends, because how many services do you plan to have? How many nodes do you plan to have? How many secrets do you plan to have? All of those things might be seemingly not related, but they are completely related, because you can actually have a lot more pods if maybe you have a lot less of all those things, and vice versa as well. So it's always a combination where pulling multiple of these lines can put more pressure or less pressure. And a lot of the cases of how we do scaling of the control plane, if the way that we look at it, if it's purely based on, let's say, number of objects, or purely based on number of nodes, or purely based on number of pods, it's never sufficient because of this multidimensional. So we continue to improve on that scaling pieces, and there's continue to work with some of you that have very different patterns. We're very confident about kind of the common case and even a lot of the stressful cases to the API. It's actually more uncommon cases where, again, you might see this image, let's say, flatten out and go to a direction, or go into a very weird shape, where that might not match as well our scaling patterns. And we need to tune them to improve that for either your specific case or maybe take on something that can be an improvement for everyone. So we've already done 10x improvements there and latency reduction, and even coming soon, we're going to have 100x kind of the error rate reduction for cases where we might even be getting some error rates as we're scaling and as we're doing these kind of operations. You'll notice one of the key things about AKS is as we're scaling, you actually continue to access the API server. And so you don't get downtime necessarily just because we're scaling. That's some of the key things that we pride ourselves on, is to make sure that even if we're scaling or upgrading or doing these things, we're not going to necessarily just create a blackout window for you that you're not going to be able to use the service at all. And so these are always things that continue, and we've done a lot of work there and continue to as well. Now in this area, going more into the application side as well, one of the key things that we've been focusing on is how can we make sure that in the worst cases, we provide you with the easiest approaches to be safeguarded. And the worst cases for us as a cloud vendor is a region failure in all kinds of ways. It's very rare these days that you actually see a region go red, like disappear or go in smoke, unless the meteorite hits or something. That's very, very unlikely. But there are cases where some form of cascading Byzantine issue can cause what we would consider internally and what you would experience externally as a regional failure. And so for that, of course, we always say, hey, use paired regions and make sure you have a regional architecture as well. And of course, inside of a region, have zonal architecture, etc. That's how you get all the nines, as you can possibly imagine. But we're going to make sure that that's easy. And so with Fleet Manager, we've been working on this kind of geo-resiliency approach to make it very, very simple. You can already build this today. You could already build it yesterday. Just like having two clusters, maybe a traffic manager in front of it. Maybe you have some pipelines or some GitOps across both of them. But now you're setting all these things up and you're managing them yourself, and you need to test, and you need to be responsible for, in many cases, the failover itself and things like that. And so we want to make it both simpler and also take responsibility on it as well. And so this is one of the things of geo-resiliency that we can simplify with Fleet. So in this case, you see, we have clusters in different regions, and you can apply your own cluster placement for them. So you can select, for example, hey, go in and say, deploy this across different regions, one, or pick all clusters in every region, pick 2 clusters in different regions. You can mix and match a lot. You can think of cluster placement the same way you think of topology within a cluster, where you select different nodes or different zones. Cluster resource placement is the essentially next level concept or layer in that thinking, where now the clusters themselves are treated in that way, and you can place across all these clusters very easily. So you point your pipelines or your GitOps or whichever it is to your Fleet, and then Fleet takes care of that deployment and ensuring that that regional resiliency and failover. Not just that, but we also announced, because that scenario is not complete without the rest, right? Networking and things like that. We've also announced on the open source side, because yes, as I mentioned at the beginning, Fleet is itself open source outside of being a product that we support and that we provide. The technology and core technology for Fleet is fully open source and also in the path of donation as well. And we've announced the ability to do multi-cluster traffic shifting with Traffic Manager. You might know Traffic Manager does that level of DNS load balancing that you can do, and that's exactly what I mentioned as I exemplified the architecture. And you can now use Fleet to basically provision and update automatically that Traffic Manager instead of having you to do it. So you'll, the same way you deploy a service in Kubernetes and that can deploy a load balancer and configure it, you can now deploy our Traffic Manager profile and backend in Fleet as well. And together with the regional services of the clusters, this will be configured with the service import and export, which are also open source and upstream concepts. You'll have your Traffic Manager pointing to your 2 clusters, and Fleet will take care of updating that. Moreover, as you move on to features that we've just really come out. We just announced those at KubeCon. They're still in the works, and we're building those into the product and rolling them out. So you expect these more in end of January, February in the product itself. But it's the ability to safely roll out changes. So we talked about maybe spreading things out across regions for resiliency. We talked about having configuration of networking, but you can also very shortly going to be able to do rollout capabilities from staggering how you do it, rolling them out across different environments. You might already know the concept of fleet upgrades, where we allow you to create upgrade runs that you will do first in staging or dev, then staging, then prod. And that's for upgrades for new Kubernetes versions or node images. But the same thing happens to your applications themselves, right? So you might want to test your application first in dev, then staging, and then across. And the rollout capabilities allow you to do exactly that. And then as you think about all these kind of things, and you start to move your mindset from just a single cluster maybe to a bigger fleet of clusters, things start to be interesting in what you can do. For example, one of the things that we're also going to add is multi-cluster PDBs or pod disruption budgets and evictions. This allows things to not be necessarily a per cluster only type of approach, where you might say, hey, deploy all this across clusters, and then when we do a fleet upgrade, we do this cluster, and then we do this cluster, and then but then inside of each cluster, we just let everything be. In this, we actually allow you to set a essentially a cluster resource placement disruption budget, which allows you to control the disruptions across your fleet. And so you can go faster or slower or further configure how many replicas you might need to have across your fleet. Again, maybe having one replica in a cluster is fine, so long as across your fleet you have at least two. And so this will allow you to have a lot more interesting, in my opinion, type of upgrades and availability settings when you're going across clusters and moving forward. Another one in this space that both helps with resiliency, helps with speed in many ways, is disk force detach. So one of the key things is there was a problem, to be fair, when a zone could go down, and basically a disk could be just stuck in that region in many ways. And so even now with force disk detach, the zone redundant kind of persistent block volume continues to be available. But how do you actually then the pod moves? How do you get that disk then to move as well? So now with force disk detach, this actually is possible. The CSI driver can force detach this ZRS, this zone redundant disk and volume. And since it's still available because it's zone redundant, you can still then attach it to a different node in this case, and the pod can then migrate and continue to do so. This is crucial for you to be when you're using zone redundant node pools, when you're using ZRS disks. Again, if you're using a node pool state and that node pool in multiple zones, you want to be using ZRS. You want to forget about LRS, etc. If you're using LRS or locally redundant, you want to be using different node pools in different zones, and that's a possibility as well. But if you're using this ZRS and multiple zones in the same node pool, then this is a capability that will be greatly valuable for you in kind of more disaster situations where a zone might go down. Another case on the still in that resiliency space, in the application resiliency space, which is crucial, is, well, in order to be resilient, you first of all need to even know that you're down and how resilient you are. And for that, you need observability. And some of the key announcements we have in this space is the GA of the Kubernetes metadata in Container Insights. So our Azure Monitor integration with Kubernetes and AKS. So you can add basically metadata fields like pod labels and more. You can add all kinds of customizable fields. You can add kind of different log level to all logs, and you can then filter by those. And you can add kind of annotation-based filtering for any workloads. So you can essentially be very, very granular on how you're filtering out your logs and how you're then querying and doing that based on your pod annotations and much more. So this allows you to do all kinds of much easier, be it troubleshooting or filtering or then pumping of different logs to different places based on what you need from those logs. Another one that we're extremely excited is on the more traceability area, the more app monitoring area, is the auto instrumentation with application insights. This was made already with that mindset that we now have for things like AKS Automatic, but with everything like in AKS Automatic, it works across the board. So you can use it in AKS Automatic, but you can also leverage this in standard AKS. And this is the ability to automatically instrument your applications with application insights. Before, you had to use SDKs or things like that, but now using kind of the Azure Monitor Application Insights, the OpenTelemetry distro, it will automatically collect these traces from your applications without any code changes. And without any changes at all. You don't even need to change your workloads or anything. You can do a per namespace even onboarding, or a per deployment onboarding if you want to be more granular. So you just essentially annotate them, and then the distro will automatically start collecting those and sending those into the application insights. You get all the richness of application-based monitoring, from application maps to the traces to performance indicators, etc., without doing any code changes whatsoever, and without even having to go one by one. You can just automatically instrument all of the namespaces, and all your applications will start to get their traces sent to application insights. So again, error rates, requests, etc., all automatically. On the backup area, I'm going to keep part when things do fail and maybe there's issues. AKS backup has been out for a while, and now we actually have vaulted backup capability, which is the ability at the end to do the restore, and that 3-to-1 backup strategy that safeguards against these regional outages by basically having an off-site backup and then restoring that into a different region. So you can restore, be it specific applications, specific persistent volumes and data, or total clusters. So you can go in and very easily go to your backup vault after you have configured AKS backup and just restore a totally new cluster to a new region, as an example. And this can be your very valid kind of disaster recovery strategy, depending on your kind of RPO and RTO requirements in that case. Then one of the key areas that I called out back at the beginning of this is kind of how upgrade is a key factor in that resiliency space. And as part of it, we have sent a number of features for it over the last few years. One of the I think more meaningful ones that we've done is an actual change to the core algorithm of upgrade, where a few months back we started continuing on drain failures. So in the past, when AKS, being very conservative on availability of applications, encountered a node that could not be fully drained, so essentially have all the workloads evicted from that node, it would just pause. So it will stop the upgrade, you'll have the operation failed, and it would just like, I'm not going to do anything else. You go and clean up that node, restart the upgrade, whatever is your preferred action there, but we're not going to continue. That could be because of a bad PDV, it could be a timeout, the pod just took too long to evict, it could be a number of things. Now, depending on the number of surge nodes that you have, you can actually continue kind of maximizing your chance of at least getting to the end of most of your nodes and most of your upgrade, and leaving behind as many surge nodes as you have. So if you have like 2 surge nodes, you can essentially fail up to 1 time. So maybe 1 node can be blocked, but you're going to keep going one by one in that case because you had another extra surge node. If you had 3, you can fail up to 2 times because 2 can be blocked on drain, and then you can still continue one by one. And that will at least attempt to get to the end of the upgrade still safely, because we're still going one by one. That 1 node still is not, we're not going to do anything to it. We're going to prioritize always the availability of the application, but at least we're going to try and continue until we absolutely can't the upgrade to the end. So that should both speed up some of your upgrade windows and simplify some of your operations as well with it, by basically ideally leaving behind just some of the nodes that might have had drain issues. One of the things that brings up is, how do I know that case? Now you can just go look back and see, oh, I'll look back and see the nodes that were in the previous version. But again, if you had 2 nodes and 2 failed, we're going to stop there. So you might have a bunch of nodes in the previous version, those 2 and maybe a couple more. So how do you know which one's to blame and that you need to go fix? So that's the new undrainable node behavior choices that you now have. So you can either keep the current one where we actually just keep as is, they're actually schedulable and we don't do anything differently, But there's a newer behavior that maybe we'll consider if your feedback is positive to make it a default, which is we're going to quarantine those nodes. So we're going to mark them as unschedulable, and we're going to label them as quarantine, as with the label that you see there, to be very easily identifiable. So if you have the upgrade and the upgrade fail because of those two nodes, they're going to be marked specifically, and you can either, if there's your cluster that you can go and fix and look at what happened. You can look at the upgrade events that we shipped a while back and see what exactly stopped and why it stopped. Or if you are managing on behalf of customers, teams, etc., you can then identify which applications and which nodes, which teams are using those nodes, and reach out to them, and which can very granularly do that. And the other part that we shipped as well is the machine and node delete that allows then those teams to very easily finish the eviction by themselves, for example, by manually moving, deleting the workload, whichever is the right way for them. And then that node can be manually deleted. So imagining that those are the last two nodes, you can just go ahead and manually delete them using the machine delete or node delete functionalities, which is one is using the AKS API, the other one is just using kubectl node delete, essentially. Specific to this area as well is we want to make sure you are aware of everything that happens. And so very related to the upgrade space, we have shipped what we've been dubbing the AKS Communication Manager. This is not anything new from an Azure communications perspective. It's just our attempt of gluing all the different things that Azure already attempts to provide you and making it more automated for us as well. So one of the key scenarios that we're doing is, for example, we're going to be sending all kinds of notifications and alerts about your automatic upgrade, as an example. So it failed. Okay, you can go into the logs, but then if the logs and the events, as I mentioned, you're not pumping them into log analytics, then those can end in 30 minutes. And so now you might not know what happened. You need to go into the activity logs, and that just gives you the top line error, and you might want to go a bit more in depth. You might also want to might be a different type of situation. You might just want to know when it finished and be notified if it finished. You might just want to know when it starts, because you might have this in auto upgrade and you have a maintenance window, and you just might want to have a notification when we kick off an upgrade. So you're aware, and maybe you go and pay closer attention, even though it's running in an automatic fashion and in a maintenance window. So Communication Manager supports all these scenarios and sends all of those into the Azure Resource Notification, ARN, and has webhook integration, so you can configure all kinds of abilities. We already have one of those scenarios in our docs, or you can configure an easy logic cap to send you an email or things like that. And we're looking forward to what types of automatic hooks you'd like to have. So we can technically now do this for anything. So we already have some scenarios that we've been hearing from a lot of users. The auto upgrade one, tell me when it starts, tell me when it finishes, tell me if it fails, tell me why it fails. These are things that we're going to be that already are available, but what other things would you like to have is definitely something that we can now much easier just add into this functionality. Next, we have that save and progressive rollout. And so for this one, you might be aware, as I mentioned before, about those fleet upgrade runs where you can have different groups set up across, and you can have these clusters in group 1, group 2, and these then comprise stages like test and prod, and then the upgrades are going to be across them. So again, you set up essentially a pipeline of upgrades, and then you trigger them, and then those go on their merry way. One of the key things we want this, but we want it automatically, not going back in time before we added cluster auto upgrade. So now we have the fleet upgrade group auto upgrade. So you can configure all of that the same way, and you can reuse the ones that you already have configured today. And you can just set up a schedule for this auto upgrade. You can set up a maintenance window, or it will respect the cluster's individual's maintenance window, and it will continue to respect all of that specific functionality you had with upgrade groups, going first to the dev stages, then test, then prod, whichever stage you configured, waiting between them, and if it fails, kind of stopping before continuing into the next stage. Next, we have easier capacity management. Again, one of the areas that I said we wanted to make it easier and kind of less hard if you cannot lock yourself maybe into a skew or something. So one of the things that we've heard for a bit is maybe sometimes you set up your whole cluster and some assumptions based on maybe a deal or just previous choices, and now you feel a bit locked into the skew. You can add node pools, but you would actually want to reduce that before, and so it just can become cumbersome. Sometimes you just might have a bunch of them, but you don't know which one is best. And so for this, we shipped the virtual machine node pools, which one of the key functionalities we're going to be adding a lot more into it because it allows for individual management of VMs. So these are node pools where, unlike our VMSS-based node pools, where there's the same template is across all nodes, which includes a skew. In this case, each node pool is comprised by a very individual instance of VMs, and so even the skews between them can be very different. And so you can scale 10 D4s and 8 D8s and 4 E16s very granularly and optimize the specific types that you want inside of the same node pool. So you can very vertically scale technically and do all these kinds of scenarios within the same node pool. And we're going to be adding a lot more functionality into it as well. Then areas of performance and scale, again, another area where there's been a lot of improvements that maybe are not as perceivable to you unless you've been looking at the data and over time. But we've had improvements going all the way from many minutes before, like 4 or 5. We have here picked a random point in time where it was 3.5 minutes, and right now it's 2 minutes without the scaler. Before we had multiple minutes in terms of node scaling latency, and now we have a P99, that 99th percentile, which kind of means the worst case if you're not familiar. So at the worst case, like 79 seconds it takes to scale a node. At the more common case or average case, it takes about 50 seconds to do that, and it can, of course, be even faster than that in many cases. But we want to make sure that the experience of the worst case is really very similar to the average experience, and then we can continue to reduce both of them together, but there's no big disparity that you get. A lot of these, you get them as a key, an important caveat, with a lot of the newer architecture. So you want to make sure that you're using that to get this, you have new node pools, that you're leveraging things like CNI overlay, that you can migrate to if you're still using KubeNet or others. And those are the two key things that you definitely want to make sure that you're using. Just making sure that you're leveraging new infrastructure, because a lot of these improvements, as I mentioned before, are not just AKS or software based, but they go all the way down to hardware. So just scaling more nodes might not be enough. You might need to have a different node pool. Again, if you're in the process of recycling clusters very often, you probably already have these benefits. But if, again, you have a cluster from 5 years ago and you never touched it and you're only scaling it up and down, it has none of these benefits. That's the key part of it. And so it's something to be mindful of if you want a lot of these benefits. Maybe create a new node pool of that one. You can kind of recycle that old node pool, making sure maybe take the chance to upgrade to CNI overlay as well. That will also get you the latest control plane updates and faster kind of pod scaling and IP scaling and that overlay networking capabilities as well. Then we have a very interesting feature that is parallel image pooling. And so the ability here is you typically serialize the pools in order to not overrun the disk. This is a bit of a trade-off between doing pools in a serial manner or parallel manner. So we did a lot of benchmarking. We actually spent a lot of time seeing exactly what the sweet spot is and what type of cases we could have this on and not. And we're now essentially launching with 1.31. All nodes by default will have parallel image pooling. You can be toggle because there's a couple of scenarios where you might see, especially very small nodes or very weird situations where you might not want parallel pooling and you still might want serial. Again, if you have only one image per node in some cases, this benefits you nothing. It also shouldn't harm you. But again, if you have very little or not a lot of pools happening, this probably doesn't make much difference for you. But if you have a lot of containers in a node, this can be tremendous for your node scaling, your node upgrading, and more, because all containers are going to be pulled at the same time. Again, the caveat there is make sure that you're leveraging our recommendations, like ensuring that you're using ephemeral OS and things like that to make sure that the I/O of the disk sustains this, because that's going to be the key thing. Is if you're downloading a bunch of things at the same time, the disk will be your bottleneck. The pipes in the cloud are going to be very, very big, so you want to make sure that your disk is not overrun, and it's not going to cause other things to throttle at the end of the day. Let's get this. Other key thing that I know a lot of you have been asking is for now another provisioning. We're currently in what we call our kind of code freeze for holidays season, but no provision is GAing in January towards the end of January. I'm very excited to kind of finally bring this into the GA with you, and with even more capabilities coming into it. So there's several limitations, of course. That was when we had the preview, and we're committed to adding a lot of the functionality and parity that we have with just regular node pools and regular autoscaler. And so you're going to see already several coming at GA, and then several coming after GA as well. And we continue to want to hear more about your feedback and scenarios as well. Another point is the general availability of Azure Cobalt. It was supported since the start in AKS, so supported in preview and supported at GA. AKS actually has the highest adoption of Cobalt across the board, and not surprisingly, it's very easy to both use it in Carpenter or use it with autoscaler, different node pools, and you can have applications being portable. You can leverage whereas you can leverage WASM, all kinds of different things to make it very, very simple to you to have like multi-arch images, multi-architecture images to simplify your usage and transition from x86 to ARM-based. And so definitely a fantastic scenario that a lot of users, I don't think I've ever seen something be so overwhelmingly positive in the response, because you get, again, 50% better performance per dollar, and just 40% total greater CPU performance. So definitely it's been fantastic across the board. And if you're not trying it out, I definitely recommend that you at least give it a shot, because it's been I'm just incredibly excited about the performance that we've seen out of this and the feedback that we've gotten. The next one is intelligent placed based on cost. And so we saw resiliency before, but guess what? The intelligent placement doesn't do just region-based. It actually does all kinds of metrics-based today. And one of the key things that you might be interested is that it actually does based on cost. So you can do things like in this scenario where we are saying, again, that's the scenario we picked, but you can choose your own adventure, to deploy a workload to 2 clusters where the CPU cost is less or equal than 79 cents per hour. And so only 2 of those clusters meet that threshold, the third one does not, and so it deploys on to those 2 that are highlighted there. So it is very, very capable of, again, selecting the cheapest one, and really allows you to have all kinds of strategies to save costs. So you can do this based on node count, you can do this based on allocatable CPU, memory, all kinds of different metrics that you can do. You can then do in terms of which order you want to kind of select from and go for. And finally, on the security area, we also have quite a lot of announcements. I'm just going to cycle through because we only have essentially 1 minute left. Again, recommending to check a lot of our bigger sessions across all the KubeCons to check the full breadth of announcements. Trusted launch on VMs to enable essentially secure boot and virtual TPM. SecComp by default is capability to secure system calls to the kernel. So in this case, we are allowing you to default what is the runtime default of containerd. And so you can turn this on or off, so that basically all pods and all deployments in a cluster will start inheriting that SecComp profile that is the default of the runtime. And it's a very sane profile. It blocks all kinds of very sane things, such as mounts and things that typically you're not supposed to allow from a regular pod. FIPS updates, we already support FIPS for quite some time, but again, due to simplifying the way that you can transition into them, we allow you to update an existing node pool, not through a new node pool to use FIPS. IMDS restriction, locking normal pods from accessing the IMDS endpoint, and restricted, so only host network pods or the node that definitely needs it can access those. We turn it on for the cluster and node pool, and this will be blocking all the pods there. Static egress gateway is a very common scenario that we've heard from a lot of folks, which is how can I get my deployment, not my node pool, not my cluster, but my deployment to have a specific IP so that I can maybe allow listed specifically or restrict everything else. With static egress gateway, you can do exactly that. You can have your specific deployment to have a specific IP, private or public, and go from there into either on-prem, a proxy, a firewall, a database that is firewall, whichever it is. And you don't have to, you can still have default egresses from the cluster that everything goes to, but you can still have that specific deployment or deployments use a specific IP. Network isolated, which allows you to not have to open up the endpoint to MCR specifically, which is what we use to service your clusters. You can now do a pull through cache to a private ACR. And because of that, you can then do what we call a network isolated cluster, because you can technically create it in a subnet that has an NSG say no access anywhere. And we can still deploy it, and we can still service it via an injected Azure Container Registry. That is basically what we were using to service from MCR. We're also GA'd ACNS, or Advanced Container Networking, which provides you both observability of pod level insights, L4 connection metrics, DNS stats, flow logs, and we've also just announced FQDN filtering, so that you are allowed to do things such as restricting, oh, maybe I can go to this URL, but not this URL very easily from my application, and you don't have to do that via IPs, which is what typically network policies allow you to do. We also have Azure Linux 3 coming up with 1.31, and it will be default on 32. And this brings Containerd 2.0, it brings the kernel 6, 6.6 specifically. It's a bunch of goodness from our kind of homegrown distro. We have auto patching available in Azure Container Registry, so that enables you to not have to continuously be the one manually updating your container images, but actually deferring that to ACR, and ACR will then take care of doing that automatically. A big ask that we've got for a while is per repository permissions. So we have that now as well. So you can have, again, in this case, using the ML repository as an example, you can have ML training permission to one person, but then ML inferencing to another person, and they don't have access to each other's repositories. And we've had quite a lot of announcements, namely 8 different announcements in our essentially MDC suite across the CI/CD pipelines, container registry, AKS, and the different layers that I definitely recommend you to take a look, because it's one of the biggest overhaul in terms of features that we've had in quite a while. From enhancement, risk, and path analysis, where you can actually go from a pod and explore what could an attacker use to attack this pod, and then go and take actions to mitigate it. You can check real-time protection and automatically isolate or sandbox a pod based on maybe some alert that you get. You can detect binary drifting based on, are the binaries in this pod still the same that I expect them to be? And you have vulnerability assessment across AKS, node pools, and pods, where you can see specifically in this dashboard what is a vulnerability, is it already patched upstream, when is it going to be patched in AKS, and what action do you need to take, if any, like an upgrade or something like that. And that all is going to be available for free in the AKS Security Blade kind of coming soon. So this part specifically is going to be a free option for you. And this kind of takes it to the end for us. I will leave it towards the questions in the chat, and we'll definitely go into it. I knew this was going to be quite a feat to deliver it at this time. A reminder that Sanket did it, that to send us your request for content. We can definitely do deep dives on the features that we covered here. We can do deep dive on sections of this presentation across a different time, and a broader view of this content as well as the story in this deck. So thank you very much, everybody, and thanks for staying up a bit late.